Secondary weapons in Helldivers 2 are going to be a critical part of your loadout selection. Not only can these serve as a backup for you when you run out of your primary weapon, but they can also prove to be extremely vital to your success, serving a special purpose, or even in some cases, this can be the MVP, outshining the rest of your loadout out there on the battlefield. And so that all begs the question, which of these secondary weapons are the best and which are the worst? Dr. Pooplove here, and in this video I have compiled all my rankings for secondary weapons, as well as made some updates to the weapons I haven't covered yet. We will put these on 3 different tier lists, one for the Terminids, one for the Automatons, and one for the Illuminate, with S being the best and Poop Hater being the worst. Starting with the P2 Peacemaker, which is your basic starting pistol. It shoots semi-auto bullets and has an okay damage with a decent mag size. And versus the bugs, this does, well, just the bare minimum. You won't be using it all the time, but really it's not going to provide much outside of the most basic level of support. And really it's only going to help you versus some of the weaker bugs. You can switch to this if you run out of your primary weapon, but it won't be that effective, so you won't get much extra help out of this. I can see it being good when there is a stray bug around, or when you just need to take something out without wasting your main weapon's ammo, but there is nothing really special or notable here. And actually, any of these other options are just gonna suit you better. So yeah, the Peacemaker is straight poop. Get flushed. And versus the bots, I really do have similar feelings. This gun only has light armor penetration, which can help with mostly little bots and the berserkers, but not really that much, as you do run out of bullets pretty quickly. And as something that you might want to help deal with those berserkers, this often won't get them in one mag, especially when you're in a panic state missing some shots. Now, one thing I do happen to like with this though is that you can 2-tap the Devastators in the heads, so if you do have good aim and accuracy, this could become a dedicated Devastator sniper, but really that's not good enough reason to ever want to take this out over just about anything else. So for that reason, I'm flushing this down the pooper. And versus the Illuminate, this is also really bad. Obviously, you don't need to be using your secondary that much, but it should be good for something. Versus the Voteless Horde, it can take a few of these guys out as you're running away, but the lower damage and mag size means you're not going to take that many out. And that actually happens to be the strongest thing about this, because it does struggle versus the Overseers and the Watchers. It even has a hard time taking down the shields, and it won't do so in a single mag for the Harvesters, and it will take multiple mags for the spaceships. And so for the squids, this is poop tier. Flush this thing down and flush it again just to be sure. Now on to the P19 Redeemer, which is basically an SMG type pistol with a fast full auto fire rate and some recoil to compensate for that. And this is actually a really solid gun for the bugs. It shreds them super fast, especially the hunters, who can often pose the biggest threat to you. So anything that can kill those guys fast is gonna be useful. This gun is the epitome of a backup gun, in that if you do need to pull it out, it will have your back, especially as the bugs get close to you. It also is pretty amazing when on the run, being able to quickly take out some of the bugs as they get close. The main drawback here is the low ammo capacity, but considering this is mostly going to be a backup for you, it shouldn't be too bad. This is very solid, and so it gets an A for me for the bugs. Versus the bots, this is interesting. Although the high recoil will hurt you at range, it does have the ability to be a solid choice when the enemies get close. It will shred the little bots quickly, and even it'll get the berserkers with one mag. And this also will 2-tap the Devastator's heads, which can be more useful if you switch to semi-auto, and that actually kind of kills the one good thing that the Peacemaker had going for it. Still though, it's hard to recommend it too much, as you're mostly going to be facing off at range, and it's only going to be providing a little bit of help. So I will give it a C for the bots. Now for the squids, the fast fire rate can be really great for taking out some of the Voteless Horde, especially while running away. It can take down the Watchers nicely, and especially if you can get a shot on the elevated Overseers jetpacks, you can take them out quickly. While it will take more than one mag to get a normal Overseer down from the body, it will mostly get them killed, so you can quickly follow up with just a few more shots. And where I think this may have the most usefulness is versus the shields. Less than one mag will take down the Harvester shield, and although it will take more than one mag for the spaceship shields, a few extra bullets will finish that off. And this can be especially great if you need something to have a fast fire rate on this front, but you want to have a primary primary something like the crossbow, because you will need something to take down those shields. All in all, this offers a lot more backup and actually has some impact on this front, so I will give it an A for the squids. Our next secondary is the P113 Verdict, which is a medium armor pistol, otherwise kind of similar to the Peacemaker, but this time with much more use. For the bugs, it can be decent. It can one-shot the little guys, which feels nice, but I think where this really shines is being medium armor penetrating, because if you want to have something like a light armor penetrating primary weapon, this can be something that you can whip out to deal with something like the hive guards, such that you don't need to aim between the cracks, which can be whack. Ultimately, I think this is a solid backup, but not the strongest, so I will give it a B for the bugs. Now versus the bots, this one shines quite a bit more. Being medium armor penetrating means it can deal with nearly every bot, and the relatively high damage per shot means it will do so pretty well. This can actually one-shot devastators in the heads, and it can deal with those pesky striders quite nicely. It does have a low capacity, and that's kind of its main downside here, but it does have some good use, so I will give it an A for the bots. And for the squids, this has some pros and cons. The high damage helps take out a little bit more of the voteless horde, and this can deal with the watchers decently too. Having medium armor penetration also means that you can headshot the overseers, but it does take about 3 shots in order to get them, so you will need to be on point to get good use of this. This also means that this can go for the overseers by shooting them in their joints, and I mean, I would hope you have something a little bit better for these guys, but at least it can do it. This won't really be that effective versus the shields though. You can take them down, but not in a full mag. This does have some decent things going for it, but to be honest, it really doesn't have that much to offer over the other guns on this list, and to me, it only really feels like a slight improvement from the Peacemaker against this faction, and so I'm going to give it a C for the squids. But this next one is for all those space cowboys. We have the P4 Senator, which is a heavy armor penetrating revolver where you can do this spin move. It also has rounds reload plus a speed loader when you are totally out of bullets for an even faster reload. And versus the bugs, this can be pretty good. With the heavy armor penetration, you do have the capability to take out a Bile Titan from the face, but it will take a ton of shots, so I don't really recommend that unless you're really in a pickle. This can do well versus the Chargers as well, being able to take them out from the face or strip their leg armor, but honestly, the most efficient way to take them out is just going to be from their butt. This is actually probably best for just dealing with those medium level bugs, taking most of these guys out in 1 to 2 shots. And I think if you dedicate it for those purposes, it actually can be really decent on this front and can be a decent backup for most things, so I will give it an A for the bugs. Now for the bots, this is pretty much a must-have weapon. Given the higher levels of armor over there, this gets used a lot. This can take the Hulks out from the face in 3 shots if your aim is on point. This can also take the Devastators out in a single shot to the head. And yeah, it can take out a Factory Strider, but with a ton of shots, so not something I would really recommend trying. This also though is amazing for the Striders, being able to hit them anywhere, although going for the crotch will be the best bet. And this can even deal nicely with the gunships. This honestly feels really good to use on this front, and oftentimes can actually end up being more useful than your primary. It can also be a nice backup if you die and lose your support weapons, because this can deal with everything. Or it can at least allow you to take other stratagems instead, knowing you have something to deal with some of these big guys. Basically, this is amazing. This gets the highest possible S tier from me for the bots. And versus the squids, this doesn't actually seem like something that would be that effective, but it actually has some good uses. While not amazing versus the horde, you can kill each of these voteless with a single shot and also deal some collateral damage, which can be nice. But where this is really amazing is versus the overseers, because you can take these guys out with a single headshot. And that means if you can aim well enough, you can just delete these guys from the map whenever they pop up. And that just feels awesome. Watchers also get knocked out very quickly with this too. And this can actually deal with the harvesters, being able to take their shield generators off quickly and getting them decently from the joints. Yet again, the Senator seems to rise above its category and seem to be something you can pretty much treat as a primary. Although I really like the Senator on the squid front, I do have to say, with the amount of secondary weapons that are super effective on this front, they kind of end up crowding this out. And so instead of an S, I think this will get a high A for the squids. Now, the next couple secondaries we have are actually going to be melee weapons used for close quarters combat. And starting off, we have the Stun Lance, which is quite unique in that this jabs at targets, stunning them as well as hurting them. And versus the bugs, honestly, it's not that good. While it can stun individual targets very well, you are going to be stuck having the rest of the horde surrounding you. And it would honestly feel a little bit better if this did some sort of a sweeping motion rather than a jab, because you really need to aim this thing almost like a gun, just with like no range. Now I do think this can be better for bigger targets, and so I could see an argument to take it out for that. Like, this will do good work for bile spewers that are close, and you can perpetually stun and kill a charger if you manage to get close to their butt. But you do have to be getting very close to every charger. And the other thing here is I just mostly question why you would use this instead of the stun grenade or even the halt shotgun. Sure, it does do damage here, but that's not a good enough benefit. And when you compare it to the next melee weapon on this list, I don't see the point of taking this one out versus that one, at least on the bug front. So I will be giving this a poop tier. Get flushed. Now for the bots, where although I still think it's not great, I have found it to fare a little bit better versus these guys. The benefit is that this can stun most things, including the berserkers, the striders, and the devastators, as well as the hulks from their back. Having a tiny bit of range for a melee weapon at least helps this a bit, considering you are not usually facing off against as much of a swarm, and so that can allow you to jab at things and not feel surrounded too quickly. That being said, it's still not that useful. You still have to get close, and while yes, you can pair it with something like the directional or the ballistic shields to help with that, you just end up getting too close and things can just get pretty dangerous. Although again, hard to choose this when you have something like the stun grenade or the halt shotgun around, but at least can do something, so I will give it a C for the bots. And versus the squids, I think this does quite a bit more decently. It does put in work versus the voteless horde, and as long as you can control your aim a little bit, you can get into a nice rhythm, spamming the stun and killing a bunch. This also does work pretty well versus the overseers, so if they are close, you can stun them for a good while and take them out without much issue. Now, of course, being limited in range, this is not worth going for the watchers who float away from you, and also you would need to get super close to elevated overseers, which isn't really worth it. And of course, do not forget about the peak physique perk, which is kind of a must-have if you do want to use melee weapons, because it will increase your melee damage by 100%. And when you do this, you can down all these guys much quicker. Overall, this can be a solid backup, something to keep the enemies off you when they get close, especially without needing to worry about losing ammo, but it's just not that effective. I'll give it a B for the squids. Now for a very similar weapon, but does have some key differences, we have the Stun Baton. This has less range than the Stun Lance for the trade-off of a different melee pattern. And this thing actually does do a sweeping motion rather than a jab, which means you can spam it a little bit better and aim a little bit less. And versus the bugs, this makes it far more effective. As a result, you have a little bit more forgiveness and can spam this even when getting surrounded. This can also stun chargers from the front, and just like the Stun Lance can get them from the back. Generally, I find this to be the superior melee weapon for the bugs and something more in line with what I would expect. I can see this as something pretty effective to really fend off the pests when they get too close, and so I will give it a B for the bugs. Now for the bots, this is definitely interesting. This can stun most things, little guys, berserkers, striders, hulks from the back, but versus the bots, you will mostly be at range, and this has even less range than the Stun Lance. It can be something though if you do find yourself overwhelmed, and I like that it can actually work versus a lot of these guys, but it's just not going to be that useful. I'll give it a C for the bots. And versus the squids, the sweeping motion of this thing makes it actually better, in my opinion, than the Stun Lance for the voteless horde, as you don't have to try to single these guys out and you can kind of just spam it. It also, of course, does stun the overseers nicely and for a decent while. What hurts this is really the range, as it requires you to get even closer to your targets in order to get them. Like this overseer, I couldn't really get to him, and it's virtually impossible to get the watchers or the elevator overseers, where at least if I tried, I could do so with the lance. Now the peak physique perk is also, of course, going to help you out here, and what I noticed is you actually can pretty reliably kill the voteless in one swing with this, and that can be hugely beneficial in thinning the herd. Going for the legs as well is one of the best ways to just take these guys out and move on with your day. Of course, you still need to get close to these guys, and that can be risky and can quickly make you just overwhelmed. So it's probably better to just do some drive-by swinging at the enemies and just keep it moving. It's similar to the Stun Lance, but I do like this better just because of that swinging motion. Either way though, it's not the top, so I'll give it a B for the squids. And rounding off the melee weapons is the CQC-5 Combat Hatchet, which is a high damage melee weapon with no stun, but can kill the enemies in less swings than those other two weapons. On the bug front, this does decently, being able to cleave open the little guys nicely, and can even deal with a charger from their legs, especially with that peak physique perk on. Now, this doesn't mean it's going to be that easy. Melee is very challenging in this game, and this one doesn't really have a stun that can at least allow you to freeze up enemies so you can have their way with them. Ironically, it makes you want to take this along with a stun bomb in order to help with enemies, which can be quite a bit of a sacrifice to your loadout. Of course, you can also take this with the ballistic shield to help block enemy attacks, but it's still going to be hard. I can see this mostly as a decent thing to just swat enemies off that end up getting too close, but honestly, I don't find it that useful. I'm going to give it a C for the bugs. And for the bots, it's even worse. Yes, you can kill a bunch of enemies with this, but you have to get so close, and because you can't stun them, you're going to need to be even more nimble. This does take some of these guys out faster, but it just is so frustrating. So yeah, this is poop tier for sure for the bots. And for the squids, I think I might end up liking this the best, as you can just swat away the Volus Horde easily and just clear out any of them that get too close, especially without needing to use up any ammo. It struggles a bit with the Overseers as you have no stun, but it will take them out quickly enough. I don't mind this. I don't think it's as good as the stun Baton, but I think it's decent. I'll give it a B for the squids. Now we have one for all those medics out there, the P11 Stim Pistol, which is super interesting because in my view, this will rank the same regardless of which faction you choose. And that's because this is a team-based gun. With this gun, friendly fire is actually encouraged because shooting teammates with this essentially gives them a mini stim to heal up or keep their stamina going. Obviously, if you do play solo, this is going to be useless, but as a team, this can be very helpful, allowing you to pump some health into your teammates at range, allowing them to save up on stims themselves and ultimately stay alive longer. Basically, you just need to pay attention to the UI here to see who is weak and then shoot them with this. Now, one downside is that it's not always understood by your teammates what's going on. Like, they may falsely see this as you trying to kill them, but I haven't really run into that issue, so probably gonna be rare that someone thinks that. Another downside though is it can be pretty darn hard to hit your teammates with this, especially as they're running around, but they do give you a lot of shots to try, so that's nice. What's also useful here is it's going to give your teammates extra stamina even at full health, so especially if you are on the move and you see a teammate slowing down, you could pump a shot into them. Overall, I'm a big fan of this and I want more team focused items like this added to the game, so I welcome this. As such, I'll be giving this an A on the bug, bot, and squid fronts. But moving on, we have the SG-22 Bushwhacker, which is a sidearm shotgun with 3 bullets and the ability to either fire them off separately or all at once. And versus the bugs, this one is pretty solid. It can pack a punch no matter how you decide to mod it, although I do tend to find the single fire mode more useful. I do like though that you can use the 3 shots to make quicker work of bigger enemies like the bile spewers, and then you can switch to the individual shots in order to take out the littler guys. Another good thing here is the amount of stagger on this can help keep the bugs off you a bit, and stagger on this front is very important. This does feel like a solid backup, and while the 3 bullet limit to the mag can make reloading very annoying, this basically serves what a secondary should. So for that, I'm going to give it an A. Versus the bots, it's a similar story, but it's just not quite as impactful. This does pack a punch, and the stagger on this gun is the best part, allowing you to have something that's very effective versus the berserkers and the shielded devastators. It's also nice to have something close range as a backup, especially if your primary is going to be more long range, because you do have those occasional close range encounters. That being said, it is a little bit less useful on this front, especially since it's only light armor penetrating, and so I'm going to give it a B for the bots. And versus the Illuminates, this feels pretty decent. The shots are powerful and can take out the Volus with a single shot, or at least stagger one or potentially multiple of them at a time. Versus the Watchers, it does seem to take about 2 shots, but you can use the triple barrel in order to take them down fast. And versus the Overseers, it will take a good number of shots, but each one will stagger these guys back, which can be very useful. And of course, using the triple barrel function can deal with these guys even quicker. I like this, and I do think it can be a decent backup for you, but it's not going to blow you away. I'll give it a B for the squids. Okay, now for the P72 Crisper, which is basically a pocket flamethrower. And I found this to be absolutely amazing versus the bugs. We know that these guys are weak to the flame, so that's a plus, and it does feel strong versus them, even sometimes being something you want to use instead of your primary. Now, it does have less duration than its bigger brothers, but this can especially be a great thing to have with you, especially if you don't have any other type of flamethrower or flame power on you. I love being able to use this while running away, giving you a nice advantage for staying mobile and lighting everything up. You can also use this to just light up the ground, holding off in advance of bugs and taking anyone who happens to walk over it. This thing is also pretty great for its ability to take out a charger. It's not as effective as the support weapon flamethrower, of course, but it still does the trick. For all this, I will give this an S tier versus the bugs. This is very good. Now for the bots, it's not quite as amazing, but it does still have some strengths. Sure, it will take the little guys out quickly, but it does seem like it takes a while against everything else. Now one plus here is it can actually take out a Hulk from the front, but that will actually take quite a bit. This also does take the Striders out from the front, being one of the few that can. It doesn't feel that strong though, like it can take a while to take out a lot of these enemies, and the limited range means you can't use it that much, but especially being capable of taking out most enemies, especially without needing to aim for any weak spots, and being able to use it while running away means that it does have some usefulness, and especially as a secondary, it doesn't have as much pressure to perform, and so I think it's okay. I will give it a B for the bots. And for the squids, I mean, this just absolutely wrecks the voteless horde and works very well while you're running away. You can also light the ground on fire to get anything that comes towards you, and doing so in the city streets makes it easy for these guys to just fall into your trap. This also takes the overseers out very fast and can, even if you need to, use it for a harvester. It's not going to be that effective, but you can use it. The biggest downside is you can run out of ammo pretty quickly, and it's pretty bad versus the Watchers, but that's not really enough to keep this thing down. This is definitely an S tier versus the squids. But next we have the grenade pistol, which is a pistol that shoots grenades. And versus the bugs, this is actually amazing. This dishes out a lot of splash damage to the horde, which can wipe out a lot of them at a time. But the damage is also very useful for the bigger ones as well, especially the bile spewers, as the explosions are really nice for those sacks. The charger also only takes about 2 shots of these to its butt, and that's awesome. And the kicker here with this one is the utility. This will allow you to close bug holes and can be useful for other objectives as well, like the spore towers and the shrieker nests. And what I love is that having this thing serving as your utility option opens up other parts of your loadouts. Like for instance, your throwable doesn't have to be a grenade because you have a pistol version. You can bring something else. This is an S tier for the bugs, no doubt. And honestly, for much the same reasons, this is very good for the bots too. You can close the bot fabricators with this, and this can allow you to feel safer in equipping something besides a grenade in your throwable slot, something like a stun bomb, which does come in very handy versus these bots. This also does deal some splash and stagger to the enemies and can be a decent offensive weapon, especially explosives do well against the bots. I do find this to be a little bit less useful than versus the bugs though, especially because on this front there is a stronger likelihood you will have some sort of high damaging explosive on your stratagem support weapons, meaning this may not be as useful. I still think it's good though. I will give it an A for the bots. And this is definitely a solid option for the squids. The grenades from this can be used to blow up the spaceships by shooting into their doors, but this can also be used to take out those pesky Tesla towers that creep up on you. Not only that, this can be used to fire into the voteless horde, blowing a bunch of them up. Although just be careful, as this can bounce and miss your intended target. 2 bombs with this can also take out an overseer, and this can be used to take out a harvester pretty nicely. This is pretty awesome and all around good versus everything, so I will give this an S tier for the squids for sure. But the next one we have is going to have you beaming. And of course, I'm talking about the Laz 7 Dagger, which shoots a laser beam, dealing damage to anything in its path, and that beam will even light enemies on fire. Versus the bugs, it can do well versus mostly the little guys and the hunters, taking them out pretty quickly. Otherwise, I do think it takes too long versus a lot of the medium guys. This is nice though, because you do have unlimited ammo, and so it's something that you can constantly be using even while running away to put chip and fire damage onto those enemies. enemies without really needing to worry about conserving your ammo. This also does well versus the Shriekers, and it's really nice in that you don't need to waste ammo on those guys, so it could be dedicated for that purpose. This can definitely be a solid pick for you, but it's not something that's going to blow your socks off. I will give it a B for the bugs. Now versus the bots, I like this quite a bit less, but it does have some usefulness. It gets the little guys quickly, like really quickly, and especially the Jet Brigade guys when they show up. And I like that you can basically drag your reticle over these guys and they're just going to go down quickly. This also does well versus the Berserkers, and it will also take the Devastators out from the head pretty nicely. The major drawback here is the light armor penetration, which just doesn't make it as effective versus many enemies on this front, but I can see this as some sort of a little guy killer, something to basically help you conserve on your medium and heavy armor weapons for the beefier guys. And so I'll give it some points for that. For me, this gets a C for the bot. And versus the Illuminate, this does decently. The beam will get the Voteless Horde on fire and take them out pretty quickly, especially if you aim around their head level, you can take them out super quickly. This is also going to deal with the Overseers decently as well as the Watchers. I was hoping, especially with the infinite ammo on this, that this could be some sort of a dedicated shield destroyer, but it's not going to really be useful for that. It can be used to pop the shields of the Harvesters in one go, but for the spaceships, it's not going to be able to crack it. Problem here is you can get these shields so close, but then while you're waiting for your beam to recharge, so too does the shield, giving you a choice to maybe have to reload your coil, which kind of takes away some of the usefulness here. All in all though, it's not bad, and I think it's pretty good on this front, just not as strong as I was hoping for. Ultimately, I will give it an A for the squids. But now for the most explosive secondary weapon here, the GP31 Ultimatum, which is a super high damaging, essentially mini nuke with low capacity and low range that essentially can serve as another stratagem slot for you. And by the way, I think this is actually supposed to be called the GP20 Ultimatum. At least that's how it was called in the initial blog post for this weapon. And it is kind of weird that both the Ultimatum and the grenade pistol are called GP31, but anyways, the Ultimatum is definitely a crowd favorite for most Helldivers. But I will say, I don't think I'm as hot on it as most are. For the bugs, this can be great for the Horde, dealing with a lot of them at once. Can also close those super big Bile Titan bug holes as well, and be useful in taking out spore towers and shrieker nests much better than something like the grenade pistol. Now, this also does have the capability to one-shot some of the biggest enemies in the game, but it can be pretty hard to do so consistently. I think the best way to do this for the Charger is to try to get them in the butt, as it really doesn't consistently get them from the front. And with the Impalers, getting them in the fleshy neck is the best. You can also get the Bile Titan, but you're gonna have to get pretty close, which can be quite the risk for that reward. In fact, the close range that you do need to get in order to make this effective just to me makes it a little bit less impactful than I would like. But you can do some things to extend the range by either shooting it while diving forward, shooting it high up into the air, or using the raise weapon emote while using this for a very consistent arc. Another downside of this is the low ammo capacity, which does make you feel like you need to be a bit choosy with how you use this, although you can counter this by either having a supply backpack or just making sure you're hitting up supplies at the objective sites. In most respects, I think you are just better off with something like the Orbital Precision Strike, which can be thrown further and has a decently low cooldown. But if you wanted to stack up on other types of stratagems in your loadout, this does allow you some good flexibility and does open up a stratagem slot and almost acts like you have a fifth stratagem when you have this thing. That aspect really does redeem this quite a bit, but just know that you do have to really get used to this in order to make it effective. It's obviously very powerful, and so for all that, I'll give it an A for the bugs. Now, for the bots, this one has its pros and cons as well. This can be amazing for utility, being able to take out fabricators, but also being able to take out a stratagem jammer, which is very, very useful. This has some great potential versus the biggest enemies in the game, but because of that range, you will need to get pretty close, and versus the bots, of course, you tend to want to be at range. I also kind of don't like that this doesn't seem to very consistently be able to one-shot the Hulks. I find that to be a bit frustrating. Still though, it's not horrible. It's just not an S tier for me like a lot of people might think. I will give it an A for the bots. But on the squid fronts, I do find this to be very, very solid. This can take out a good chunk of the horde when firing at them, and can one-shot the spaceships without needing to take out the shield beforehand. Another aspect of utility that this has is it can actually blow up a city wall, allowing you to escape, especially if you're in a jam. This also has the ability to one-shot a harvester when its shields are down, and I do find this to be pretty consistent in doing so. Also, of course, on this front, you happen to have more ammo lying around the city, making you feel a bit more free to use this without fear of when your next resupply might be. For that, I will give it an S for the squids. And now for the Plaz 15 Loyalist, which is basically a pocket purifier, a plasma shooting weapon that can either be shot fast for weaker shots or charged up for high damaging and staggering explosive shots. And versus the bugs, this is very solid. This will deal with things quickly with that fast fire rate, but it will also be able to deal with the horde in the charged up mode. And because this is a one-handed weapon, it can be quite useful as you can run away while charging this to get a little bit of distance and keep away from the enemy. And that actually makes this an advantage that this has over the normal purifier. This also is the best sidearm in my opinion for dealing with the chargers, having a super fast time to kill, especially if you do what I like to do, which is to fast fire a mag into their butt and follow it up with a few charged up shots underneath them from the front. Overall, I really do love this, and yeah, this is an S tier for the bugs for me. Now for the bots, this is somehow even better. The charged up shots can hurt a lot of these guys at once, dishing out some good stagger too, but this also just completely melts the heat sinks and is capable of taking out tanks, cannons, hulks from the back, and of course this has the benefit of the other plasma weapons in that the explosions can reach past the armor to damage the higher armored enemies without needing to go so much for the weak spots like the Striders and the shielded Devastators. Overall, this is very solid and I love it. So again, this is an S tier for the bots. And for the squids, this is simply awesome. Versus the Voteless Horde, your best bet is to go for the charged up shots, as this can wipe a ton of these guys out at once, but you can also do some quick semi shots if you're in a pinch. Overseers can be taken out in just 3 charged shots, but also if you want to take them out a bit quicker, you can do 1 charged shot followed by some semi shots to finish them off. For the Watchers, you can take them out either way, but charged shots at least save you ammo, and perhaps one of the coolest things is that you can use this on a harvester. The explosive shots here don't do that much damage, but you can stagger them, and especially when they're doing that laser beam thing, you can stagger and stop the whole thing. This can eventually take them out, but it will take forever. Regardless, that stagger very much comes in handy. All in all, this is pretty amazing and does much more than you would expect from a secondary, and so this is an S tier for me. And so here we have our list. This is how the secondary weapons rank for the bugs, here is how they rank for the bots, and here is how they rank for the squids. But where would you put these? Let me know down in the comments, and check out my Helldivers tier list playlist for my most up-to-date rankings. A big thank you to my YouTube members, and otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.